This segment is brought to you by Jig Masters. Step up your game with high-quality performance jigs, spinner baits, buzz baits, and more from jigmasters.com. And always, when in doubt, get the jig out.
Welcome to the Bass Kayak and Beers podcast on the Paddle and Fin Network. On this podcast, we'll be talking about life and kayak fishing. Every week, we'll have a special guest, whether it's a tournament angler, content creator, or just a regular guy or girl who just loves to go kayak fishing. So grab a cold beer, sit back, and enjoy the show. Bass Kayak and Beers is sponsored in part by Douglas Rod. Go to douglasoutdoors.com to check out their full lineup and locate your nearest authorized dealer.
Yak Gadget, made in America, based outside of Nashville, Tennessee. Yak Gadget offers all kinds of storage accessories, quick mount motor mounts, anchor systems, track mounted accessories, even paddles. Go to yakgadget.com and get your kayak decked out for your next trip out on the water.
The 153 Bait Company, based in Troy, Ohio, make everything from plastics to custom painted hard baits. Hook 'em hard and hook 'em often. All of our baits are made to order and all of our hard baits are hand painted to order. So go to the153anglers.com to place your order today.
Welcome once again, guys and girls, to the Bass Kayak and Beers podcast on the Paddle and Fin Network. Once again, we, as always, have a great episode for you today. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about the Texas Kayak Fishing Championship in Lake Belton. So for that, we have my special guest, Rolando Nandin, who actually just won that tournament that trailed over the weekend. So Rolando, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for taking time.
Yeah, thank you, Armando. Thanks for having me on, man. It's always a pleasure, getting asked to be on these things. So I'm definitely grateful for getting that opportunity.
Oh, man, it's our pleasure and our honor to have you here on Bass Kayak and Beers and on Paddle and Fin. I've followed you for a while now since I started getting into tournament fishing here in Texas, and I know you have a reputation for being one of the best anglers out here in Texas. So it's nice to have met you. I met you on Lake Palestine on the TKC over there. We both struggle a lot. I think we both ended up with 2 fish that day, right?
Yeah, man, that was a tough one. And there's just not much you could say. I did go in blind to that one, but that weather just really put a hurting on that. But they were there. It's just, can't always figure it out,
Yeah, true that. All right. So Rolando, for those that don't know you, haven't heard from you, tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you do other than fishing? And how do you got into kayak fishing and competitive kayak fishing?
Yeah, so I mean, I've spent most of my life here. I was actually born in Mexico, and my parents had lived here in the States for a while. So I'm actually pretty much born and raised almost here in San Antonio. And I was fishing as a kid. I always used to go to had family in Del Rio. So we would go over there, and I fished at Lake Amistad as a kid with the family, and off the bank, we'd run the banks and things like that. So I've been fishing for a long time. It's just I never really got into it competitively until about 4 years ago now. Got into kayak fishing. I wanted to buy a boat, but in the meantime, I decided I was like, let me try this kayak deal first before I jump into the boat scene. And I got hooked on it, and ever since, I never really looked back, and I just didn't pull the trigger on a boat, and I've just been kayak fishing since I think 2017 is when I really got into it, competing. And other than that, when I'm not fishing, I'm actually I'm a mortgage underwriter. So I work for different. I used to work, been around different banks, but I pretty much underwrite loans, conventional loans, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac loans, for people that are applying for loans. So that's what I've been doing for, I don't know, I guess since 2011. So that's what I do on my time when I'm not fishing. So Monday through Friday, I have an 8 to 5 job. And then Saturdays, that's when I find my time to get out there and do some homework for the most part, because now I don't really fish recreational as much anymore, because I love the competition and I love these trails. Yeah. And in order to stay, in tip-top shape against these guys, you got to really pretty much put the time in. So anytime that I'm like, I get a little fishing time, it's going to a lake that's coming up next on the tournament or something like that. So, but that's usually, that's kind of in a nutshell, my life there, underwriting mortgages and then fishing on the weekends and family time in between there too. So
There you go.
Yeah.
That's interesting that you mentioned that. Me, myself, just getting into kayak fishing like 3 years ago, and competitively, really this year. Last year I did a little bit of Slay Nation, just a few, but now I've really I dove more like headfirst into tournament fishing, and that's one of the things that I want to that you mentioned that's pretty interesting, because it really is one thing that I don't have time from recreation. I do have time for recreational fishing. I actually went to Elm Fork Trinity River yesterday, and I finally got some okay, let me do some recreational fishing. And it's interesting because it's for you to be really good, or at least competitively good at tournaments, you really do have to invest a lot of time pre-fishing and research and practicing, because it really does. I think a lot of people that are maybe getting into fishing that think they can do social media and competitive, professional kayak anglers. That's really hard to do. Because it's one thing to put content out there, and it's another thing to really grind it out and figure out, spots and what's going to work and what's going to not do research. Which is not what mainstream media wants to see, really, when it comes to YouTube and social media content, So it really is a lot harder than people might think it is. I talked to friends who's like, "Oh, what are you doing this weekend?" "Oh, I'm going to a kayak fishing tournament." And they're like, "Oh, that's, kind of like, luck of the draw if you catch, whoever." I'm like, no, there's a lot of research. A lot of research, a lot of work you have to do.
Yeah.
So, that's interesting.
Yeah, I agree, man. It's when some people look at it on the outside and they'll tell me, they're like, "Man, you take the fun out of it, man." I was like, "Nah, that's just the way I have fun. Is the competitiveness to me is just the fun. That's what really drives me to it. And it's fun. You got to keep a balance of things, right? You got to learn how to also have fun, and not. You can be too overly competitive, and then it gets to a point where you're taking kind of the fun out of it. So there's a balance there, but it's all business pretty much for when it comes to fishing, because I don't have a lot of time during the week. So most of the time it's just weekends come and it's like, okay, I like this week. I know Choke is coming up, Choke Canyon for one of the events. So I'm going to go try that one. And then there's the Cats tournament is going over there.
Oh, Cats tournament. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Not the Southeast Texas. You're right.
Yeah,
it's
Cats is going. And then the following weekend is Lake Amistad with TKC. So it's always something that's you got to be doing to prepping for those lakes. So, and there's a lot of homework that actually you have to do off the water, so that when you get on the water, the little bit of time that you have time to be on the water, it's as productive as it can be. Because you got to do that little research beforehand.
So I know we were here to talk about Lake Belton, but now that you bring it up, your originally old stomping grounds is Lake Amistad. You feel confident going back there to Lake Amistad?
I want to say yes, but it's actually not that easy. It's a good lake. You can catch a lot of fish there. I've caught a lot of fish, but it's a lake that I've fished it a lot off the bank. So, if I go back and I go in the kayak, I may be exploring different waters that I've never been to. But I'm comfortable on clear water. And I feel confident going over there. It's just, it's a big lake, and the water's so low that those lakes, if you can find any little grass, it's gonna hold fish, So it's a pretty fair playing field for everybody. I think nobody really gets to fish it a lot. I don't fish it a lot anymore, nowhere near as I did as a kid. So I doubt a lot of these guys that are going out there are really, also familiar with the lake. I'm sure everybody's at least been on it once, but I don't really think I'm going to have like a competitive advantage or anything because I've been out there.
Yeah, and I think from what I've heard from other people, the lake has changed a lot.
Yeah.
over the last few years. So, like you said, I don't think anybody I don't know everybody that's going to be fishing there. So maybe some local guys are going to join in.
Yeah.
So they may have an advantage on it. So that's going to be interesting, man. It's going to be pretty cool. Lake Amistad, that's kind of like a lot of people talk about Lake Fork and all that, but Lake Amistad is kind of like historic out there.
It is. It's a beautiful lake too, man. And so hopefully it got some water here, with these rains that we gotten, and maybe comes up a little bit. So that'll definitely help. But I'm excited about going over there. So it should be fun.
Wish you the best out there. So let's talk about Lake Belton. You won Lake Belton, and you kind of came from behind there towards the end. How did it? First of all, how did it feel to get that win in Lake Belton?
I feel good, man. I mean, I'm really good friends with a lot of those guys I talk to they're pretty much hammers. I've talked to I don't talk to Guillermo a lot. I know of him, but I've seen him around. I say hi. I knew he was in there. I was kind of nervous about all those guys because they can fish pretty darn good. So I knew that I was like, you know what, if I could just get a decent bag and see if I can get in the money, I'll be happy. But Jeremiah, who took second, is a really good friend of mine that I talked to, and we had just finished talking about it before, saying, man, it'd be cool if we could take 1 and 2. And I was like, yeah, man. And we actually did.
I'm sure he preferred being 1 instead of 2, but
I'm sure anybody would, right? He'll take it. But yeah, no, it's one of those events that I was just hoping to just get a limit, because I heard it was really tough. It had been fishing tough. And then, of course, you hear some people obviously always get on them, right? So fortunate for me that day, it planned out kind of, midday, and I started finding a group of fish, so that worked out. But
so you went. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Yeah, ask me the question. It'll be easier for me to.
It was. We were talking on the pre-recording. You didn't get to pre-fish this tournament. So how did you pick Did you did research like?
So
Google Maps, something like that?
Yeah. Usually what I do is I pull up Google Earth, and I draw the lake down a little bit to try to see stuff. I already had done that previously on this lake before, 4 years ago, when I fished the Texas Throwdown. And I think it was in 2000. I don't know if it was 17 or 18 or somewhere there. And I ended up I think it was 6th place or something, out of 100 and something. And that area called my attention. A couple reasons. A little bit of the research that I found online stated that area was a very productive area all year round. It was good with held fish pretty much all year round. There's good bluff walls, and there's 2 big coves on either side, and there's some good timber there. So, and anytime there's boulders and big rocks like that, I like stuff like that because it always holds good fish. So I figured, I was like, why not? I've already done the only research I've ever done on this lake before was 4 years ago. I started looking again. I knew there was going to be a good amount of boats because of TTZ. So I decided, I was like, man, I'm not going to I already know the area that I fished before 4 years ago. There's no point in me trying to go and investigate and find other areas. So I'll just go back to the area because I know it holds fish. And there's a lot of stuff in the water that actually that you can fish: the timber, the drop offs, the boulders. You can go to the back. There were secondary points on there that I could fish, and I was like, well, find out to see where the lake is at as far as the spawn. And I usually don't target spawning fish. I'll target the pre or the post spawn. And that area kind of allowed me to do all of that. So I just went straight back to it. And being that it's clear water, and I love fishing the jerkbait, that was one of the key playing lures for me that day. So the jerkbait is really something I've always liked to throw. and that played a big role, and so did the cranking. Basically, I just threw 2 rods all day. I mean, I carry 16 rods on my kayak.
Are you kidding? 16 rods.
16.
Wow. Well, okay,
Yeah.
now obviously I have to ask you, what kayak do you use?
I use a pro angler, a Hobie 14 footer. So, the crate holds 10, and then you got these rod tubes on the side that hold 3 in each side. So I pack it to the net. Yeah. I'm sorry, what was that?
I say it holds more than that, because that's the one I have, and I put like two on each one.
Yep. Yeah, you can do more if you wanted to, but man, I'm already. It gets to a point where like 16 is it might be a little too much, but but I'm all about. I don't like to retie, and so
I know.
Of the Belton, I actually did break off a fish, a good one in the morning, and I had to retie to another jerkbait because that's what I lost it on. But whenever it's on, I usually, for the most part, those 16 rods, I only usually touch about 4 to 6 of them, unless the wheels are falling off and I'm just grabbing everything and throwing everything to see what's biting. But for the most part, usually it's only 4 to 6 rods that maybe I'll touch. Belton, honestly, I think it was just the jerkbait and the medium side and the medium crankbait rod. So that's all I threw all day. That's it. And people were fishing around me using the jerkbait. And for some reason they weren't catching, but I personally thought that maybe it was the depth. They were fishing a little bit closer to the bank versus me. I was actually off the bank. So everybody was kind of running through there, beating the bank. And I found them about 10 to 15 feet off, where it was getting a little bit deeper, and I was throwing a deep diving jerk bait. I couldn't really see if a lot of people were throwing that, but the one I was throwing was, it gets about down to 10 to 12 feet of water. But I also, I'll share a little secret. I like mine to sink. I like my jerk baits to sink and not suspend. And I use that towards my advantage to get into deeper water with them.
How do you make them sink? Like you put like a little shot in it?
You can either there's several ways you can do it, right? You can obviously up your hooks and the rings on it so it's a sink, or they even sell like the suspend dots that you can put underneath them that stick. And it works, man. And you can do it those multiple ways, and that's what I usually do whenever I'm trying to fish for deeper water, because jerk baits only really get down to about, I don't know, I think it's like 12 feet that you can usually get them to. Yeah. So, which is pretty deep, but sometimes if I like to get deeper, I try to.
Now, what were you catching on the jerkbait? Because I've heard you got a couple of nice smallmouth bass.
No, actually, I didn't catch any smallmouth bass.
Oh, okay. I got that wrong.
They were all largemouth, and I caught those on probably about 15 feet of water, 15 to 16 feet of water, and most of those were targeted because it's so clear. That water where I was fishing was pretty clear. I could see sometimes once the sun came out a little bit, you could see some activity in that 6 to 7 range. And of course I have live scope. So the live scope actually did assist me that day quite a bit, actually, to be able to target that deeper water and those fish with the jerk bait. A lot of people have seen it already on Bassmasters Elite with Patrick Walters and all those guys, but it's not easy to do. And a lot of people think that forward sonar is like, it'll help you catch a lot more fish. And it can, but it takes a lot to actually get it down. And you waste a lot of time when you first get it.
Yeah.
So it's not that useful right off the bat. Definitely have to spend a lot of time with that tool, and you have to discipline yourself not to use it sometimes, because there's times where I just turn it off and I'm just, there's times where you can beat the bank and you need to beat the bank because that's where they're at. And then there's times where you got to pull off that bank and fish a little bit deeper, slower. And that's where it can play a big role. And yeah, it does catch you one or two key fish that you'll need, in order to win tournaments. So, that's definitely assisted me in that, but it did take me a while to really dial that in. I'd say it took me about a year and a half to almost even 2 years to really, really get that thing down to where I don't mess with it too much. I know when I want it on and I know when I want it off, and I have it dialed in. And the only reason it took me so long is because I got that technology when it kind of first came out. So I didn't have all those YouTube videos like you see now.
Yeah.
So it took me a little bit longer to get used to it, and it actually made things worse for me when I first got it. I wasn't catching that many fish, and it was just I was paying too much attention to it. So
yeah.
But a lot of it in the morning, I started throwing. I started with top water, didn't really get a whole lot anything going with that, and then I threw a crankbait, didn't get anything going with that. Finally, the jerkbait is when I lost a 20-inch fish in the morning. Over some suspended trees, and I loosened the drag too much, and she pulled me right into the trees, and it was a mistake I made, and I couldn't get her out anymore. So she busted off early in the morning, but I did get to see her, and that was an easily 20, 21-inch fish. And I was like, man, that's big bass already gone early in the morning. It was around 8 and about 9 o'clock, I think, when I hooked into that. So I was pretty devastated, because it's hard to come by those 20-inch fish there. So, but yeah, I just continued the day with that. And then I went into some flats out in the back of the coves. And that's where my crankbait did a lot of the work. I started using the crankbait in that 10 feet of water. And the same thing with the crankbait as I do with the jerkbaits. I usually try to get them a little bit deeper than I can. So I use, 10-pound test line as opposed to 12. That also helps a lot getting that lure down more. And it got to, make those long casts, keeps that lure in that strike zone longer, because I've noticed in clear water, they tend to stay behind the lure longer. So if you don't get a very long cast in clear water, you could be bringing them to the boat too soon, and then you're coming up and they turn around and don't actually take the strike at it. So I was making some very long casts and reeling it in, and I noticed that was helping for sure, because there's times where you could actually see on the live scope where they're following that lure for a good 40 feet before they even decide to actually bite it. So usually, like I said, that happens more in clear water, because they're able to see things a lot better. So they're kind of trying to make sure that's real or not. You don't really get that too much on stained water or dirty water, of course, because they're just reacting to it more than anything else when it passes by them. But I think I caught a 20-inch fish right in front of another boat that had just fished the area, and they were fishing with looked like Texas rigs. And I went around them, and they were fishing a stump that was underwater. It was a tree stump, and I went around them, and I hooked into a 20-inch fish right where they were fishing at, which, those type of conditions those days that, that I pay attention to that, because sometimes, you read all this information and it tells you cloudy days, you want to throw reaction bait, you want to do this. And sometimes your days don't go like the way the textbook tells you, right? So
yeah,
I always pay attention to see if people are fishing slow around me and if they're catching them. That was one of those days too slow. You kind of wanted to cover water, and that proved it, because those guys were fishing slow through there. They still didn't get that bite. I went through there, threw the jerkbait in there, caught that 20-inch fish, and the guy's just looking at me like, dude, I just fished that.
That's it. Yeah, that's always heartbreaking. So somebody catch a
Yep.
bass right where you were.
Yep. But that's the way it goes, man. And always keeping, your eyes peeled, seeing what other people are doing. I pay attention to anybody, whether they're new on the water or not. There's always information that's available to you there sometimes. And if you're paying attention, you can capitalize on that stuff sometimes.
Yeah, that's a good point. Kind of be self-aware of what's going on in your surroundings,
Yeah.
and all that. So your plan A was kind of like beat the bank, and then plan B was to move further down with further deep with the jerkbait and the crankbait, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
How your 5 fish, did they all came on either jerkbait or crankbait?
All my 5 keepers were on the jerkbait and the crankbait. Yep. I caught other fish caught one on a drop shot, which I thought the drop shot was going to be more effective, and it wasn't for me at least. And I caught on a drop shot, and what else did I catch on? I think a shaky head, and that was it. And then predominantly everything else just came off of two lures, which was my jerkbait.
And it was, I think your winning number was what, 90 and 3/4?
91. 91 inches. Yep.
91 inches.
Yep.
So it wasn't like a big, we didn't see those big numbers we first saw on the TKC, where I think it's like what, 100.
Yeah.
104, was it? Something like that?
Yeah. I heard that day, TTZ was on the water. I'm not sure how accurate this information is, but the guys were talking there on the ramp saying that TTZ, I think, took it first place with like 16 pounds.
Really?
Yeah, which is low.
Yeah, really low.
Yeah, so
for Texas.
I don't know how accurate that is because I didn't really look up the information. But if that is truly accurate, I mean, that just shows you it was kind of a tough day, really, because the lake is also known to fish tough sometimes, especially clear lakes like that. They're not very easy to fish, but the conditions were good for it because anytime you get cloudy days and a little bit of wind like that on a clear lake, that's helping us, right? It's clouding up that visibility for the fish, so it gives us a better chance.
Yeah, especially in the clear water. Now, You mentioned you were fishing closer to the dam, right? Like more south of the lake.
I was fishing right actually in the middle. There's Rogers Park, it's called.
Oh yeah.
So it's right in the middle. So you know how you have the main lake, and then you have the mouth of the river where it starts to go into that winding area. I was right in that middle cove, where once you start transitioning out of the main lake into those river sections, it's the first area that makes the bend to the right where it starts to wind. So it's kind of that midsection of the river, what they call it, and that's where I stayed in those 2 coves. I went back and forth, and having the trolling motor now, my Torpedo helps a lot with covering water, so that definitely assisted me as well. So that definitely helps. You can vacate an area quickly now, where when it's not good,
Yeah, because I kind of had the different scenario. I don't have a motor, so to me it was like I had a few miss hook set that I don't think I would have gotten the money. I would have gotten kind of around where Matt Scotch was, somewhere in the mid 70s, low 80s. If I were able to land, if I was able to land all the miss hooks that I got, I think I would have gone there. But it's one of those things where I was at that spot, I was getting the bites, I just weren't landing them. So I was like, do I really want to go and leave? I don't have a motor. Do I really want to go and leave to find another spot? Do I want to stay? Trying to figure out how.
It's funny you say that because you say like you were getting the strike. I was getting bit too, and I couldn't too, and I was like, man, what's going on? Like I'm seeing them, and they're not committing, or I don't know what's going on. And I could see, and then so that in the morning when that's happening, I said, let me put my live scope down and see what's going on around. And there was a couple of times where I could actually see them come up to my lure, like a freight train. It looked like they were about to hit it, and then they wouldn't, or they would bump it, and I was like, man. So that tool, the live scope, helped me determine, like, I got to do a bait change. Either see if there's something else that when they get closer, they'll be more predominant to striking it. And so I went through a few changes in colors that I did on the jerk bait, and I found one that actually worked pretty good. And I was like, okay, you know what? I caught one on this, and I was getting more strikes on it. The one that was really good I spent time looking for it online because I fish mega bass a lot. The mega bass.
The best jerk baits.
Yeah, I fish those, and without a doubt, man, I love those things. And sometimes the smaller ones that are out these days, that what they call the juniors, they're hard to come by. So I had already gotten one, and I finally I had it. I was excited about using it, and sure enough, man, that was the deal. But that 20-inch fish in the morning, I already had caught some binks on it, but that 20-inch fish in the morning had me lose it, and I lost it. And so that was the only one I had because they're short in supply, so they're hard to come by.
Yeah, and they're not cheap either.
They're not cheap either. And but I ended up just putting on another one, and I could tell the difference. Like I really had to work harder at getting them to bite it. And when the water's that clear, and to me, it's important to have a lure in those situations where it is very clear, where a little more detail on those lures is good. And for me, it's all about being silent lures. For me, the silent lures in clear water are much better. And that's what I fished on my crankbait. I fished a balsa crankbait, no rattles, no nothing. And I felt like that was a little bit more of a natural presentation to them. I just had to make sure that I put it there in front of them.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because my story is kind of heartbreaking. And again, we're here to talk about you, not talk about my day. But I talked to a couple of boaters that were on the TCC as well, and I share what my experience. And they were telling me the same thing. I've heard a few people say the same thing. There was a lot of people just miss hook sets. I don't know what it was. I think my experience, I had one where that was the most heartbreaking one, because I think that would have been the biggest fish for me. I don't know. Well, I don't know what was it. You got the big bass of the day, right? What was it? 21 inch?
20 and a half.
20. It was, so I think I would have gotten close to what you judging, because I had it jump up. But the story with this one was I didn't get to pre-fish, so I do a lot of Google Earth, which giving away probably too much information. I had Bailey Eichbread on my podcast last week, and after the show we were talking about Google Earth, and I was like, man, I keep hearing about people moving their waypoints from Google Earth to I didn't know that. Like I've seen, like I do Google Earth to say, thing, but I never knew you could do that. So about 2 days before the guy from Fish the Moment, the YouTube guy posted that video how to do it, Bailey Eichbread was showing me. So I spent 2 days prior to the tournament just going to Google Earth and Lake Belton, and I found the spot. I mean, I covered Lake Belton with like 200 waypoints, and I finally decided this area and was Owl Creek, boat ramp by Owl Creek, has the most waypoints. So I'm going to stick to that area. And sure enough, I found a juicy spot. It was like a half moon of just big boulders, and in between timber.
Yeah, and, I mean, that's all.
And it was a big. It was like goes from 6 inches of water or 2 inches of water, drops down immediately to 4 or 5 feet of water, and then it was the juiciest spot. Everybody was hitting that spot. I fortunately got there before everybody else. I didn't want to leave it, but anyways, I'm making this story way too long. I caught what I think was a bass guarding the fray, because I noticed a lot of I thought it was bait fish, but when it got brighter, the sun started coming out. It's like, oh, those are fray fish. So I started skipping Senkos all the way down below the water level is a little high, so below the brush. So immediately I get hit, and I thought I got snagged because it was so shallow, and I didn't feel the fish come up that I didn't set the hook hook set, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, missed hook set. So I throw it again, thinking he's not gonna bite it. He or she's not gonna bite it, whatever. And again, hit it immediately. Tried to make a better hook set. Kind of caught me off guard again. I didn't think it was gonna hit it again.
Yeah.
Or if it did, it was gonna be, wait a little bit more. Not exactly when it landed on the water. And then third time, this is the third cast in a row. I skip it again, and he hit it, and I just laid down the hammer. I mean, I did the hook set of my life. It was a Senko on a spinning rod, on a medium.
You got the drag going at the same time.
I tightened the drag a little bit, and I swung for the fences. And as soon as I did, that bass came up, jumped right in front of the kayak, and it was big. I was like, okay, as soon as I saw it, this could be big bass, and it immediately spitted it out. And that was 3 casts. After the third cast, after I swung for the fences, he was not biting. I kept throwing and throwing and throwing. He was like, nah, I'm not biting that.
Well,
this time I ain't biting it.
Yeah, no, and the same thing happened to me. The big bass that I caught was exactly protecting fry. It was right next to what looked like a little bush in the water, and I could see a cloud of fish, and I was like, I didn't know at first. I didn't know if it was a bass or not, and then I saw it, and I'm like, no, that's got to be a bass because there's this cloud of fish, and I could see it, and I must have cast at it like 15 times, man, and with the jerk bait. I cast with the jerk bait that was a pearl white jerk bait. Cast, and it would follow it. It would follow it all the way, never come in. Don't cast, follow it. I cut that thing off. I put another color on there, and I go through there, and I'm trying to get the jerk bait to make sure it goes through the little fish that I'm seeing, because I want it to think that that fish is eating those little fry. So I threw in there, and the thing was, it was kind of difficult because you're fishing jerkbait around timber, and it sucks because the minute if you hook into that tree or limb there, like you blow up the spot. You got to go right up on it, right? So I would cast to the side, and then I would float over to the right of it, and then jerk it down all the way to the base of it where they were at, and I would jerk it right through there and make it pass through the little cloud of fish that I was seeing. And it would get aggressive, and I could tell every single time that I would go through there, it would get more aggressive and more aggressive and more aggressive. And I was like, it was like almost fishing a fish on a bedfish. And finally, on one of those, I cast out there, I get it, and then it snapped at it and got that little junior mega bass jerkbait. It swallowed it all, man, and I got that sucker. And as soon as I saw it coming out of the water, I was like, that's another big one. I was like, just make sure you land it now, And but I didn't make the mistake that I did the first time, which was I hooked into one big like that, and I was afraid to pull the hooks out, that I backed off on the drag on the first one, and it pulled me straight into the trees. And sure enough, this one was already trying to do that. So I said, I have a better chance. I'd rather pull the hooks out of it than I have to go through that again. So I ended up pulling hard on her, turning her around to get away from the trees. And I got her in. It was nice because I had one of the boats. That's one of the boats was watching me, and I think that was the first, that was the first 20-inch fish, which was my first. Where I was like, okay, maybe this will hold for big bass. But then I caught that 20.5, which topped it. So
yeah,
so that helped.
I saw a lot, and I saw somebody posted a picture of a big bass that was kind of like the tail bleeding. So it was talking about
that was Jeremiah.
Jeremiah. So how many people caught nesting bass? So the area where I just saw a lot of nesting bass, and I thought about going, like you said, I was on the flats, close to the flats, but it was so chock full of sand bass that I was like, there's no way I'm going to be able to throw a moving bait out here. Yeah. And have something other than that, because sand bass were just blowing the whole day. Sand bass were just blowing up the whole area.
Yeah.
I figured, okay, if I want to avoid, I was talking to, I forgot his name. he was fishing around that spot too, and he's telling me, man, if this would have been a sand bass tournament, I probably would have ended up at the top. And I had a few bites like that, so I decided to throw a big swim bait. It wasn't a big swim bait. It was more like a 5-inch swim bait.
5-inch,
yeah, 5-inch swim bait. Kind of like shiner. Big shiner, and I thought, okay, that'll at least keep the sand bass away. The third cast, huge sand bass came up, and I was like, finally, I got a big one.
Yeah,
so I was like, man, I can't get away from this sand bass. So it was like it's moving away. I think, go ahead.
Yeah, you get around those man, and then it's hard to keep them off.
Yeah,
it's hard to keep them off. Luckily, where I was at, I didn't really get a whole lot of them, and that's why I usually try to stay away from like main lake areas. Sometimes that happens. You get around them, because they tend to come around. But yeah, I'm like you, man. I don't like. I'll start throwing a little bit bigger baits or something like that if I'm forced to fish around them.
Yeah, because they would. Everybody that at least the area like Owl Creek, there was a bunch of guys fishing out of Owl Creek.
Where is that?
Boats, actually.
Is that further up the river?
Yeah, I'm not that familiar with the river. It's the first time I go to Lake Belton. I'm sorry. I think the name is not. It's Leon River, right? And then the lake is Lake Belton, right?
Yeah. I think you're right. Yeah.
Owl Creek is about a couple of bends from the main lake, from the dam, do a couple of bends, and then that's on the west side. And I went, like I said, I didn't pre-fish, so I went a lot with the fishing report which had come out like a week before the tournament. So I figured that was the latest one. So well, it's not exactly, on point, as far as, it comes the day before the tournament. It's actually a week old, but it kept saying the best way to get bass is up, hugging the bluff walls, hugging the shoreline, and up Owl Creek. And that's what I did. And I did catch one on Owl Creek. That was a funny one too, because I was looking for bass, and I couldn't find it. It was like 15 minutes prior to the tournament ending, and I finally see this bass up shallow just chasing bait fish, and I throw that willow Z, is that what I call it, by Z-Man, that little Seaman jig head with a willow, kind of like a chatterbait, but the blade is kind of like a willow. I forgot the name of it. It's just an eye, the hook, and the blade.
Oh, got you. Yeah. It doesn't have a skirt, right?
No, it doesn't have a skirt. A lot of vibration on it. So I threw one, and I actually wasn't the perfect cast, but I was able to reel it close. And as soon as he either felt the vibration or heard it, he smacked that thing like there was no tomorrow. So that was cool. So fishing report kind of went with what, like my fishing experience in line with what the fishing report said. But a lot of missed hooks, and I think for me it was just a lot of just fish protecting the fray, not really committing to eating the bait. Think I lost you there, Rolando. Are you there? You still there, Rolando?
Oh, yeah, I'm here. It just had a small connection, I guess, deal.
Yeah. So going back to your setup, you mentioned you like the you went on this tournament, you went with the really deep diving jerkbait. You already mentioned the Megabass. I'm assuming Megabass 110 plus 1 or plus 2.
Yep. I carried all of them, and but most of my damage was done with the plus 1.
Plus 1. Cool.
Yep.
And
but it was the junior one. The junior one is the one that's the smaller one. It still has 3 hooks on it. But part of my research, and as a matter of fact, I had talked to a friend of mine, Adam Eslick, and he mentioned that kind of kind of reminded me and drew me to saying, you know what, maybe I should downsize my lures, was there's not a lot of big gizzard shad or a lot of big bait in that lake. So so I was like, you know what, I had the 110, the regular size tied on. And I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go with the +1, but the junior size. And I think that made a difference for sure.
Definitely. And then you mentioned you like long cast on crankbait, especially on clear water.
Yeah.
What setup do you use to give you the most out of your cast on a crankbait?
Well, when I throw the small and medium sized crankbaits, I have it on a Daiwa Elite 7. I think this is a 7.6. It's a glass rod, and it's a 10-pound test line fluorocarbon. I use Invisics, and I can get that one a long ways. For me, it's important to have that long rod because that's what lets you whip it out there, Yeah. And that lighter line really lets it get down pretty quick on the strike zone. Because I used to crank with 12-pound test line a lot, and I just recently changed to 10, and I think that makes, that helps. There's times to use 12 where you don't want to use 10, of course, but clear lakes, anything you're doing, for me, it's got to be long cast, and long rods assist with that, and also silent baits, which is what I try to go with. The 110s, they have that weight transfer system, so they do have a little bit of a rattle in them. Yeah. It's not really really loud, but my crankbaits on those clear lakes, I'm just I try to go with the balsa ones, the wooden ones,
Yeah. And what reel do you use?
I have a mixture of Shimano, Curados, K's, and I have some Mentaniums. But for the cranking specifically, I have a Shimano Curado K. Actually, it's kind of a big reel. It's 200. It's a 200 size. 10-pound test line on I think it's a 7.6 glass rod, and then my jerkbait rod, that one is super light. I have a custom rod that was built by J Rod Custom Rods and Repairs. It's basically it's a North Fork blank. I guess what's equivalent to it is like a G Loomis GLX. I think that's what it basically comes down to on that one, specific one. And I have a Shimano, not a Mentanium. It's the Shimano. It's their lighter reel. Gosh, I can't remember what it's called. It's pretty pricey, if I remember correctly. It's super light. It only weighs, it's one of the lightest reels out there on the market. That combo for my jerkbait, that has to be paperweight, because once I get going with that jerkbait rod, if it's on, man, it tires your arm out a lot, and I'll fish it all day. And that is a 6'10", 6'9", medium, and I think it's a medium fast tip. I think it is. But it's, the whole setup is like, it doesn't weigh anything. That's and cool. I think, and that to me, that's really important, because if you put too much arm into it, you could be overworking the lure, and you tend to do that because your arm gets tired when you're doing a jerkbait. And so when you're doing in these tournaments, I find myself that when you're getting fatigued, you start imposing the wrong action on things. So I finally found
your shoulder more than your wrist.
Yeah, your wrist, and sometimes you have to slow it down, because I noticed that with those Mega Bass jerkbaits, man, they dart pretty good. Doesn't take very much of a tap of that line and that pull to get that jerkbait to do what it needs to do. So there's times where you need to really do it and get them to react, and then there's times where you got to find that right cadence. With those light setups like that, you have full control of that, because it eliminates the fatigueness that kicks in throughout the day with those heavier setups.
That's interesting. And it's like you said, it's I think, every every technique has its kind of like specific rod and reel selection that's going to work best. But jerkbait, because of, like you said, that all that constant dynamic of movement, it wears you out more than anything, probably more than any other bait out there. So having like if there's one setup that you really, I'm not saying that you have to invest a lot of money in it, but if you have money to invest on a nice setup,
it'd be wise to do it.
It'd be wise to do it on jerkbait if you want to love throwing jerkbaits. I think that's one of, other than the Texas rig, I think that's one of my favorite baits when I started off fishing. It was just Texas rig and jerkbaits. And it's one of those dynamics where you're just like, if you have a rod and a reel that's heavy, it's gonna wear out on you, man.
Yeah, it's
gonna wear out you a lot.
Yep. Yeah, and there'll be times where you're just like, man, I just want to throw something else because your arm. I mean, when I first started doing it, I was throwing it on a medium. I remember back in the day, I used to throw it on a medium heavy rod, and it wasn't light. It was actually a pretty, considerably heavier than what I have set up now. And I think I went for 4 months where I had such a bad arm pump on my left arm because I would fish the jerkbait so much, but that rod, until I figured it out, I was like, man, I'm using too much arm into it, and it was actually hurting my arm. And I was like, man, I need to find something lighter. I went through a couple of rods before I actually figured out, before I got this one that a friend of mine made for me. And now it's perfect, man, because I can literally throw it all day, and you'll feel it a little bit, but nowhere near like I used to before.
It's a good insight too on going back full circle with what you're mentioning about the I forgot the live scope. Are you using the Garmin or the I know there's different Garmin, so that's live scope. If I'm not, that's correct, right? Live scope is the Garmin, and the HDS live is anyways,
live target.
So live target, correct. So the live scope, it's a good point because I remember, I think on Kayak Bass Nation, their podcast, they were talking about that Hobie BOS event in Oklahoma. I think it was Broken Bow. One of the guys, I think, came third, was using that live scope for like 30 feet of water. Like it was like 60 feet deep, but fishing at treetops around 30, 40 feet deep. And obviously, I mean, it's hard to do if you don't have a live scope. But the point was that Ryan was mentioning, it's like, just because you have that doesn't mean, and this is a word of warning for those that want to invest on a live scope. Just because you have that, it's not automatically going to turn to success. Maybe it will. Maybe you're one of those special talents that all you need is a live scope to get you into the, to the next level. But for most of us, if you're going to get into live scope, it's going to take time. Like you said, for you, it was what, a year and a half, 2 years to kind of really dial it in.
Yeah, so it was about it. Yeah, it's not going to happen overnight. It's definitely, for someone that gets it now, it's definitely going to be a shorter learning curve for them because you have so much information on it now. When my wife actually surprised me for it when it first came out for Christmas, and she bought it for me. She bought it for me, and she bought it for me, and I was like, hey, what's this? And she's like, yeah, I saw it. They said it was a really awesome thing for your fishing. And I was like, and I remember looking at it, and then I started reading the box, and I was like, holy crap, it's like an underwater camera. I was like, is this going to be even legal? And then, I was excited about trying it. I went out with it, and I literally was not catching more fish. And I'm like, man, what's going on? Like, it's super exciting, though. Because when you first get it and you see it and what's going on, you're automatically intrigued and you automatically think like, oh, there's no way, like I'm on 100% guaranteed I'm going to catch more fish now. And it didn't go that way for me. And then I started realizing that I wasn't even fishing anymore half my day was spent looking at the screen, following things, trying to catch them. And if I could sit and take myself away from that and watch myself, I would say about my time with the line in the water was reduced by at least 30 to 40%. Less time in that my line was in the water, because I was looking to get, like, I was trying to fish for everything that I saw on the screen at the time. Where when someone doesn't have that, you're focused on using your eyes and looking at what's going on around you. And there was plenty of times that I went out and I started doing tournaments with it where I wasn't winning. I wasn't doing anything with it. I mean, all it was doing, it was just taking my time looking at it. So, the thing I can tell people is when they first get it, don't automatically think it's going to get you a lot of fish right away, because you have to learn how to incorporate that into your style of fishing.
Yeah.
Because it's going to take away from you having a line in the water, which is the key importance of, that's how you get your, a strike,
Yeah.
So,
and I think it makes you more depending on technology and takes away your fishing instincts that you're cultivating as you try to get better. I remember the first time I got my fish finder, I bought my Ascent 12T from Bass Pro. And I was doing, I was learning to fish, and I got to where I was like, oh man, I'm getting the hang of this. Let me get a fish finder. And I got a Rain Marine 4-inch screen. And all of a sudden I just spent half the day just looking at the screen and trying to figure out how it works, how to take more advantage of it. And it really can make you a worse angler, in the sense that if you're one of those persons that are just learning to fish and are just getting your feet wet and getting those instincts of what to throw, when to throw it, and all of a sudden you're distracted by this technology, there's no substitute for being for the instincts and knowledge that you acquire by putting your line in the water and figuring things out and being self-aware of what's going on around you. Looking at a lot of times you'll see things that'll tell you. I had somebody on my podcast a couple of weeks ago, I can't remember who he was, but said that is one thing he learned from his grandparents is, like, if you pay attention, the water is going to tell you what's going to work and what's not. And it doesn't necessarily mean by the bite. It's just by looking at it. Pay attention to what's going on. You see a fish, a bluegill, and you're throwing a shad pattern. Take away shad pattern, throw a bluegill pattern, stuff like that. That's going to help you determine. I'm sorry. So gathering, although technology has its place and it has the potential to take you to the next level, it has to be incorporated into your fishing and not take over your fishing. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And a great example of that is that, I mean, we're all victim to it. Even at my, like, where I have this much experience with the live scope, it still sometimes distracts me and I have to turn it off. And a prime example of that was one of the events that we did at Decker Lake for cats. I think I took off. I went to my spot. I'm fishing, and we launched at 6:00. At about 8:45, I already had almost 2 hours into the day. Almost more than 2 hours into the day, and I didn't have a fish. And I was trying to use my live scope, and I look over, and there's a guy coming, and he had just finished yelling and screaming and doing all kinds of stuff because he had just caught like a 25-inch bass. And I was like, oh, there's big bass. I look over and I'm like, hey man, how big was that? He's like, oh, it's 25. He's like, yeah. And I was like, man, that's good catch, man. I thought anybody's going to catch you. And I asked him, because I looked over and I was like, man, he doesn't have any electronics on his kayak. I was like, how many fish you got, man? And he's like, I'm 4, man. I only need 1 more. And it's 8:45 and I got all this crazy stuff on my boat. I don't have a single fish. And that clued me in right away. That right there told me this guy is beating the bank. He's running, just fishing the bank, no electronics, no nothing. I said, I immediately literally turned my unit off. I turned it off. I put everything up, and I went around him, and I started beating the bank. And man, I think within 2 hours of doing that, it was already like 10 or 11 o'clock. I already had caught 2 20-inch fish, and it put me in contention to get in the top 10 that day at Decker. And it was all by turning off the freaking sonar,
Yeah, I think that Decker tournament I don't if I remember correctly, that was kind of like one for the books, right? They're like the top 2 guys ended up going back and forth. They ended up like 104 and 103, something like that, right?
Yeah,
that was an epic tournament.
It was. There were some big fish caught. Your usual people, I don't remember who took first and second on that one, but there was it was that event that I was paying attention too much to my screen, but that day was windy, it was cloudy, so anytime you have those kind of conditions, for me, my experience is I don't want to slow down. I need to cover water. So
that's a good point.
That's exactly what that guy clued me in, and kind of just refreshed things in my mind, because I was trying to force things to happen where I was at. And when I looked over and I had this conversation, a quick conversation with the guy, I was like, man, this guy's catching him. And then I said, you know what? It's windy. It's cloudy. What am I doing? Turn off the electronics and go beat the bank. And sure enough, I mean, that got me plenty of fish within the next 2 hours.
Yeah.
But
go ahead. I'm sorry.
But that's to your point. There is, the electronics, man. If you try to rely on them too much, you'll miss those key moments of fish feeding, or paying attention to what's going on around you.
Yeah, and then there are times like on spawning season, there may not work. If you're looking for a tournament to win a tournament, it may not work because you can't. They're spawning what 1 feet 6 inches of water, and you're out there. That's not life skill's not going to help you on that one.
Yeah,
I don't think right now the technology is there, so it has its place. But again, it's something like if you're gonna get into it, just be mindful that there is a learning curve. Just like with anything, whenever you upgrade on a kayak, upgrade on anything that's new that you're not familiar with, it's gonna change your game. What you hope is that down the road that investment will pay off.
Right.
But to think that it's gonna pay off immediately, that doesn't always happen.
No. Nope.
Well, Rolando, I've had you for an hour almost, so I don't want to keep you up too much. I know it's a weekday, so I do really appreciate you taking time to join us at the podcast. It's an honor to have you on. And again, congratulations on your big win at Belton Lake at the TKC. If you want to I want to give you a few minutes to thank anybody you want to thank, sponsorships or family members, whoever you want to thank that helps you.
Most importantly, my wife, man, she lets me fish. So that's number one on the list. And, of course, I got a small little shop here in San Antonio, Texas, which is, Outdoor Alphas. He supplies me with a lot of equipment. I get a lot of stuff from him, and he sponsors me for a lot of these events. And then the other guy, of course, man, is my workhorse right now. That's been my jerkbait rod, Jared Souls, who runs J Rods Custom and Repairs. He custom builds rods, and he built me that rod and a couple other ones that are coming along the way. So definitely shout out to those guys. So if anybody wants to get a custom rod build, J Rods Custom Rods and Repairs, and Outdoor Alphas here in San Antonio. They got some pretty unique baits there that are, most of the time you have to order. You can't find them at Academy or Bass Pro Shops. So building up that little shop he is, and it's going good, man. So if anybody wants to visit, it's there in San Antonio.
There you go. So if you live in the San Antonio, if you're headed that way, go check him out.
Yep.
Well, Rolando, once again, congratulations and thank you so much for joining us. For those out there listening, if you made it this far, we do appreciate you tuning in. Go check out Douglas Rods. Go to douglasoutdoors.com, huge sponsor of our podcast. So go check them out, douglasoutdoors.com. Their LRS lineup and their X Matrix lineup. And if you're listening today on Wednesday, Thursday, we have an episode from the guys from Final Cast. I was actually a guest host. And we had one of the new sales manager for Douglas Rod talking about the new products that Douglas Rod is bringing out. So go check him out, douglasoutdoors.com. So thank you again. Have a great day. Wear your PFDs.
Thank you, Armando.
Thanks for tuning in to another killer episode on Paddle and Fin. Don't forget to go check out our website at paddle_and_fin.com. Don't forget to check out the YouTube channel at Paddle and Fin. If you got a question, comment, want to hear from a future guest on a future episode, feel free to email us at paddle_and_fin@gmail.com. Don't forget to follow us on social media at Paddle and Fin on Facebook and Instagram. Shout out to our show supporters, Angler. The Angler button and app just makes for a better time on the water and creates a virtual logbook for every fishing outing out on the water. Shout out to Rocktown Adventures, located in Northern Illinois, for all your kayaking, camping, and hiking needs. Shout out to Jig Masters Jigs. When in doubt, get the jig out. Go to jigmasters.com